Welcome to Freddie's Huge Ask Podcast. Huge lives and the stories behind them. And now here's your host, Freddie Cruz.
The Devil's Dictionary is a cyberpunk thriller by Steven Kotler, who happens to be the world's foremost experts on peak performance. And yes, you are going to need to inject this book straight into your veins. Steven joins the show right now.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. So despite the name of the book and some of the ominous themes, and I have read it, you went out of your way to make sure this wasn't like dystopianville. So let's talk about why that was important to you.
One, I wanted to write a thriller. You're going to give me 7 hours to read one of my books. You better have a blast, right? Like page turning, up all night, laughing out loud, mind blown, have a blast. And the stuff that does that to me the most has always been, cyberpunk is a fancy word for saying near-term future sci-fi. So like our world 10, 20 years from now. And cyberpunk deals usually with like darker themes in a darker world. I wanted to poke at the darker themes. I didn't want the darker world. That's not fun for the reader. You know what I mean? You're flying through pages and it's getting worse with every page. That's not like the joyride I want for my readers. And I want them thinking more than I want them scared. And I want them feeling more than, so that's sort of my take on it.
I want to talk about the drug, and correct me if I'm getting the pronunciation wrong. Cyberpunk?
Cyberpunk. There's two drugs.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Right. So there's two drugs. The idea here is really simple. So the book backdrop, right? Big theme. I wanted to create a world where the biggest environmental challenges that we now face, climate change, species die-off, extinction, that sort of thing, had been solved. And I was asking the questions, okay, if we're going to really solve these challenges, what has to change in the world? What has to change in society? What has to change in their psychology? What has to change technologically, culturally? And in our psychology, there's if you study human performance and environmental problems, which I do, there's an overwhelming belief that if we don't shift our attitude, if we can't widen what's called our sphere of caring, how far does empathy extend, right? Does it expand just to your family, your friends, your tribe, your country? Do you cross the border of species? Do you feel empathy for animals, your dog, maybe, wild animals, plants, animals, ecosystems? So that's the question that I'm sort of poking at there. I can't remember how I got lost on this tangent, so I'm going to stop there and ask you to redirect me before I go
well,
off.
Absolutely. And I like to piggyback on that, because one of the drugs that you write about in the book is Cyberpunk, which is incredible. You're tripping like a tiger, and you're experiencing empathy. That tiger treating you as kin. So, wow.
Not as weird as you think. So it's well-known fact about psychedelics. When you take psychedelics, in fact, there's great research that just came out of Imperial College in London on this. When you take psychedelics, nature relatedness, our ability to empathize with plants, animals, and ecosystems wildly increases. And when it does, so does environmental activism. And this is really well known. Flow, which is what I work on, also does the same thing. It expands empathy and it expands nature relatedness, et cetera. It happens automatically with certain altered states of consciousness. Compassion meditation in the Tibetan meditation traditions does the same thing. I wanted to say, okay, let's take this a lot farther, right? Let's take a psychedelic that doesn't just increase nature relatedness. It lets you sort of feel one with the animals at a really deep level. And that's Cyberpunk. And it's named, I stole the name from Dune.
From Dune,
actually.
Well, and I like the pop culture references. Not entirely happy that Vince Vaughn is dead in the novel.
Yeah, but we have great diners.
Great diners. That's the payoff.
We have the Vince Vaughn Memorial Diner, and it's a chain. So
Yeah. Now I want to get to a passage where Lion, who is the protagonist in the story, he talks about complimenting, how compliments light up the brain's reward centers like cocaine. So how effective, given your background, how effective is this technique as a journalist? Because I feel like this may have been like some kind of autobiographical line.
There's a bunch of those there's journalist techniques in there, for how do you get subjects to feel comfortable? How do you get people to tell you the truth? I also have to tell you, I was a bartender for a long time before I was a journalist, and I was a magician, like weddings, bar mitzvahs, that sort of thing. Before I was, magic is the art of fooling you. Bartending is the art of like talking to anybody, and journalism is the art of getting anybody to talk about themselves. So like all these things, you need little bits of psychology. And yeah, when you compliment people, you get dopamine flowing in their system. And sometimes, like when people do cocaine, it makes them talkative and they say things, and that's good for the story. Not always good for the person, but very good for the story.
Yeah, I want to get to, because I just there's so much action in the story, and I can tell it's obvious to anyone who is familiar with your work that a lot of your journalistic background is sprinkled all throughout the plot. But there are two lines in particular that I love to kind of unpack. And that is one, under right conditions, everything is prey species. And two, this one is from the bad guy, Z, who says, lunacy is a fairy tale. The full moon doesn't make us mad. So whichever one of those lines you'd like to talk about, hopefully both.
Yeah, the lunacy is a fairy tale because this is really odd. This is really actually creepy. So for years, for decades, for centuries, right, we thought the full moon makes us mad. And so they went out and they've done studies, right? And they measure things like how many patients check in at psych hospitals during a full moon, do crime rates go up, or not? All that stuff. They've tried to track it. And what they find is the full moon doesn't make us crazier at all. There's zero, zero, zero proof it does. But it doesn't change the fact that people keep reporting more incidents of craziness and more incidents of crime during full moon. And what it turns out is, no, the full moon just illuminates the earth more, and we can notice more of our madness. So we see more of our lunacy. It's there all the time, but it's the full moon that we notice. So that's just creepy.
Yeah, it is. Well, and I'm glad we cleared that up, because I was under the impression that this might be some kind of metaphor for technology. Like humans have always been this violent and crazy. It's just everything is magnified. You can see it right here on your smartphone or on your laptop and whatnot.
Yeah, there's a I don't in the companion book, right? The Last Tango, which some of the same characters cross over, right? It's a world I created, and there's a bunch of different books in the world, though they're not. You can read them in any order or whatever. That is social media and its sort of impact on our collective consciousness. I poke at that a little bit more. It's a little, but you're totally right. You're absolutely correct. That's really smart. Well done.
Thanks. So yeah, and I feel like Z's character is a villain that only you could create, having listened to the audiobook of The Art of Impossible and getting to know all the different parts of the brain and the oxytocin, serotonin, and all this, that, and the other.
It's the future, right? So brain implants are a thing, and brain mapping the human connectome is a thing. And just like when we first started to really understand neurochemicals, dopamine and serotonin and endorphins, and how they drove behavior, right? Like we heard a lot about dopamine as a reward chemical, or you give Parkinson's patients dopamine, L-Dopa, to increase the amount of dopamine in their motor system, right? So you get smooth movements. And what do you get as an accidental byproduct? Gambling addiction. When all this, when this was sort of starting, once we were figuring this out, you got neuromarketing, right? Oh, we can use what's happening in the brain to make buying decisions, study how people make buying decisions and sell them more stuff. Yeah. And it turns out sort of maybe a little, but that's really not the big picture. But the dream has been the human connectome, right? The wiring diagram of the brain. And the feeling is, once we get the full diagram, now we can really use it to sell you shit. And that's sort of what the bad guy is trying to do.
He's like the ultimate corporatist capitalist, kind of like that caricature, so to speak.
Well, he started out as an info marketer, and the thing that really distinguished info marketers, and this was coming right out of neuromarketing, is they were using fear to sell, right? Over and over. The world's going to end, and if you don't buy this toothbrush, you will not be ready to brush your teeth in the apocalypse, right? Like that's what's going on. And you saw a lot of that. So I was like, okay, this impulse to like prey on fear. I mean, look, let's look at the media, right? We don't have a problem to prey on fear and use it to sell us stuff. This is ancient, right? This is ancient. It is. Our technology gets better, our ability to do this is going to get better. And so that's, I was playing with that in the future a little bit as well.
Yeah, I'd love to take a moment too, Steven, to talk about, because you've got so many different things going on, whether it's the Flow Research Collective, you got these books that are out, but you're also co-founder of Planet Home, and then there's the Forest and Fire Collective, and anything else you'd like to talk about with regards to your passions with regards to conserving the planet.
Yeah, it's, I've been writing about environmental issues one way or another for 30 years, and I've been sort of working on environmental problems for 30 years, first sort of as a reporter, and now much more, as you just pointed out, as an entrepreneur. And I sort of started by building nonprofits, right? Like I built Rancho de Chihuahua, which is a hospice care sanctuary that my wife and I run for dogs. So we have a sanctuary for small dogs with big problems, usually old age related. And then Planet Home is a company that does works on climate change, big climate solutions. And then the Forest Fire Collective is a collective. It's individuals, organizations, businesses, whatnot, dedicated to ending catastrophic wildfire and restoring forest health to the American West. So all of those projects are sort of ongoing efforts to like essentially do what, half of my books are about how do you use technological solutions to solve environmental problems, right? I spend a lot of time on that in the books I wrote with Peter, and a bunch of them that I wrote on my own. And these companies, in a sense, and organizations are an attempt to take those ideas and turn them into, real things in the world that can actually make a difference.
Yeah.
Open question if I can actually make a difference, but we're trying.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about all of this is that when you think of environmentalism, you think of worst case scenarios and the people that cry wolf, and the world is going to end tomorrow if we don't do anything. And what I like about your approach is that it's approachable and it's optimistic. And I'm like one of those people that knows that there's something definitely 1000% going wrong. I just see people with the solutions and I'm a little skeptical. Because I know, well, I'm not an expert on human nature, but I'm just like,
it's a race against time.
Yeah.
Right. The reason I introduced a psychedelic that can bond people to animals and make this change so quickly in the book is quite simply we're in a race against time. We have the technology to solve our problems.
Yeah.
Great example this year. This year is the first time in history this has ever happened. We saw $1 trillion of investment in green energy, which is insane, right? This is also the year that companies got very serious about triple bottom line environmental goals. In fact, I was noticing it so much that I started talking to my friends about it. Are you seeing the same thing? Am I crazy? And then the Harvard Business Review did this giant article on how, no, this is the year that companies got real with triple bottom line goals, and it's no longer just talk. There's a lot of action. And so those indicators are there as well. Are we moving fast enough to defeat climate change? Are we moving fast enough to defeat species extinction? By the end of this century, 70% of all species on Earth are going to be gone at the current rate of extinction. That's an apocalypse unlike anything you could possibly imagine. That's a tight clock. Ecosystem services that depend on those species, research out of Stanford said we've got about 3 generations until that starts to seriously wobble. We're already seeing climate change is one of those wobbles, right? So by, UN goals by 2050 or else, these are, the or else is an open question, right? Like a lot of people are like, is it 2050? Is it 2070? Are we going to escape? Nobody knows, but like they're real problems. They're giant and there's a clock on them. as a general rule, in our history, when the problems are real, there's a clock on them and we can see them, and we have solution. Like, we usually can get there. That said, it's an open question, and there's a ton of stuff, COVID, wars, that could derail a lot of this that we don't see coming. So it's interesting. I'm like you. I like our chances. I try to be rationally optimistic. And one of the reasons I write a book like Devil's Dictionary, where it's an optimistic overview, and it's got dark and somewhat pessimistic things that it's about, is these are problems that are going to come up. All I did was take all our technologies, spin them forward 15 years, and like tell a story in that world. So all the problems I'm pointing at in the book are things that are going to happen. So my hope is that if we can see them ahead of time, like this, we can start to solve them before they become these huge, big things that divide us and slow down our ability to meet these challenges.
I love everything about that. And I love the book, The Devil's Dictionary. Again, a cyberpunk thriller. It's not dystopian. There is some optimism in there, some humor, and you get a little bit of everything thanks to Steven Kotler, one of many best-selling books that he's got out right now, the new one again, The Devil's Dictionary. Steven, where can my friends find out more about what you're doing?
You can find me at stevenkotler.com. KOTLAR.com. And if you're interested in flow, learning more about that side of the world, flowresearchcollective.com.
Steven, thank you so much for coming by the podcast.
Thanks for having me.